It started with a single post that appeared online at exactly 6:17 a.m. Eastern Time, a grainy image paired with 4 words that would ignite the internet within minutes: Don Lemon taken into custody. No explanation, no source, just a timestamp, a blurred photo, and a silence that felt louder than any headline ever written. By the time the sun rose over New York City, the story had already split the country in two. Some called it impossible, others said they had been waiting for it. Inside a quiet Manhattan apartment, Don Lemon stood at the window, coffee untouched, phone vibrating endlessly on the counter behind him. Messages stacked on messages. Missed calls from numbers he recognized and many he didn't. Producers, lawyers, old colleagues, even people he hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted the same thing. The truth. But the truth, Don knew, was no longer something he controlled. Just 12 hours earlier, his life had still followed a familiar rhythm. Wake up early. Scan the headlines. Jot down notes. Prepare commentary. He had spent decades doing exactly that, shaping narratives, challenging power, asking questions others were afraid to ask. He had survived scandals, firings, public backlash, and private betrayals. What he hadn't prepared for was the sound of a knock at his door at 5:42 a.m. Not a polite knock. Not a neighbor's knock. A firm, deliberate knock that carried authority. Don opened the door to find 3 men and 1 woman standing in the hallway. Dark suits. Federal posture. One badge already visible, as if to save time. Mr. Lemon, the woman said calmly, we need you to come with us. Those words would later be twisted, reposted, and weaponized across the internet. Some versions added handcuffs. Others added shouting. A few claimed he tried to run. None of that was true. What was true was simpler, and far more dangerous. They told him it was about an investigation. They did not tell him which one. As the elevator descended, Don's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. You warned them too early. Now everyone's watching. At that moment, Don realized this wasn't about something he had done recently. It was about something he had uncovered. Months earlier, long before the viral video, Don had received an encrypted email from a former media executive who had disappeared from public view after resigning abruptly. The message contained no greeting, no signature, just a sentence and a file. They don't own the truth anymore. The file had been explosive. Internal communications, financial records, quiet agreements between powerful media figures, political operatives, and corporate donors. Not illegal on the surface, but devastating if exposed in full context. Don had done what journalists are trained to do. He verified. He cross-checked. He waited. And then, against his better judgment, he confronted the wrong person. Now, as a black SUV pulled away from the curb, Don Lemon understood the first rule of modern power: if they can't silence the story, they discredit the storyteller. By 7 a.m., hashtags were trending worldwide. News clips replayed the same blurry image over and over. Commentators speculated. Influencers exaggerated. Fake insiders claimed certainty. Arrested, detained, questioned, rated, each version more dramatic than the last. What no one knew yet was that this story wasn't about Don Lemon at all. He was just the opening chapter. And somewhere deep inside a federal building, a decision had already been made that would pull politicians, journalists, billionaires, and entire media networks into a single, uncontrollable collapse. The story had escaped. And it was only just beginning. By the time Don Lemon was escorted through the side entrance of the federal building, the story outside had already mutated into something unrecognizable. Television panels debated his possible crimes without naming a single charge. Social media accounts claimed insider knowledge they could never have. A rumor, once launched, no longer needed truth to survive. Inside, the air was colder than necessary. Intentional. A psychological detail Don noticed immediately. They did not put him in a holding cell. That alone told him this was not a routine arrest. Instead, he was guided into a conference room stripped of personality. No flags. No family photos. Just a table, 3 chairs, and a single folder placed precisely at the center. 2 agents entered. One older, gray at the temples, eyes tired but sharp. The other younger, observant, silent, still learning when to speak and when to listen. Mr. Lemon, the older agent said, sitting down slowly, you are not under arrest. Don did not respond. Years in television had taught him the power of silence. We are investigating a coordinated information exposure operation, the agent continued. And your name is all over it. The younger agent slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, encrypted emails, metadata timestamps, and one document Don had never seen before. A memo titled, Media Stability Containment Protocol. Don leaned back slightly. That document, Don said calmly, isn't mine. No, the agent replied, but it references you as a variable risk. That was the moment Don understood the scale of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't about journalism. This was about control. The agent explained carefully, choosing words like landmines. Over the past year, a joint task force had been quietly monitoring the unauthorized circulation of internal media coordination strategies, unwritten rules that governed what stories moved forward, what stories stalled, and which narratives were quietly redirected until they disappeared entirely. The public called it bias. Internally, it had another name. Stability. Don had seen hints of it throughout his career. Stories that suddenly lost momentum. Guests who stopped getting booked. Investigations that died in editorial limbo without explanation. At the time, he had told himself it was coincidence. Market pressure. Ratings. Legal caution. But the file he had received months earlier proved otherwise. And worse, it proved that someone inside the system was panicking. Why bring me in like this? Don asked. Why let the world think I've been arrested? The older agent exhaled slowly. Because whoever leaked that video wanted to send you a message, he said. And they wanted to see who would react. As if on cue, the younger agent's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, and turned the screen slightly so the older agent could see. Another video had surfaced. Different angle. Clearer. It showed Don entering the federal building. And the caption spreading beneath it read, "This is just the beginning." Across the country, behind closed doors, phones were ringing that hadn't rung in years. Former anchors called former producers. Political strategists reached out to media executives. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who leaked the protocol? And who else had a copy? Back in the conference room, the agents finally said the part they had avoided. We believe there is a scheduled release, the older agent said. A coordinated drop. Documents. Recordings. Timelines. Enough to permanently damage public trust in American media institutions. Don's eyes narrowed. When? He asked. The younger agent hesitated. 72 hours, he said. Don felt something shift, not fear, not panic, but clarity. This was no longer about defending his name. It was about deciding whether the truth should be managed or unleashed. As Don stood to leave, temporarily released but far from free, his phone vibrated again. A new message. You were never supposed to be the face of this. But now that you are, choose carefully. Outside, cameras waited. Microphones surged forward. Questions flew like weapons. Don said nothing. But as he stepped into the daylight, he knew something the crowd did not. The story they thought they were watching was only the distraction. The real collapse was already moving, quietly, toward the center of everything. The moment Don Lemon stepped into the car, the silence became unbearable. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums with unfinished conversations and unasked questions. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed, unaware that something foundational had begun to crack beneath its feet. His driver didn't ask questions. That, too, felt intentional. As the vehicle merged into traffic, Don opened his phone and scrolled. The narrative had already been written without him. Headlines spoke in absolutes. Commentators speculated with confidence. And somewhere in the chaos, carefully placed accounts nudged the story in one direction: guilt. Don understood this game better than most. Control the framing early, and the truth becomes irrelevant later. By the time he reached his apartment, 3 more leaks had surfaced. Each one more damaging than the last. Screenshots of internal emails stripped of context. Audio clips cut mid-sentence. Familiar voices reduced to fragments that could be interpreted any way the listener wanted. Someone was building a story brick by brick. And they were using his name as the foundation. Inside his apartment, Don finally allowed himself to sit. He placed the phone face down and stared at the wall, replaying everything he knew about the original file. There was something missing. Something he hadn't noticed before. He opened his laptop. The encrypted email was still there, untouched since the night he had first read it. He re-downloaded the file, this time examining the metadata more carefully. Timestamps didn't line up. Access logs showed repeated openings from locations that weren't his. Which meant only one thing. He hadn't been the first recipient. As Don processed this, his secure line rang. A number he hadn't seen in years. Don, the voice said, low and urgent, you need to listen to me very carefully. It was a former network executive. One who had vanished quietly after testifying in a closed-door inquiry that never made the news. They're not leaking randomly, the executive continued. They're stress testing the system. Watching who panics, who denies, who reaches for legal cover. Who's they? Don asked. A pause. Everyone who benefits from the illusion. Across the country, emergency meetings were happening behind glass walls and locked doors. Media CEOs reassured advertisers. Political consultants advised silence. Lawyers prepared statements that said nothing while sounding confident. But behind the calm, something else was happening. Trust was eroding in real time. Viewers began pulling old clips, comparing statements, noticing contradictions that had once been invisible. The audience wasn't just consuming the leaks, they were analyzing them. And they were angry. Back on his laptop, Don found a hidden partition inside the original file. A nested archive protected by a second layer of encryption. He hesitated only a moment before opening it. What he found made his breath catch. A timeline, not of events, of coordination. Dates when stories were promoted. Dates when others were buried. Names of decision makers linked across networks that publicly claimed to be competitors. Notes in the margins explaining why certain truths were premature or destabilizing. This wasn't conspiracy. It was documentation. And at the bottom of the file was a message, clearly meant for whoever found it last. If you're reading this, the release has already started. They will come for you next. Don's phone lit up again. Another unknown number. Another message. They've chosen you because you're credible enough to be believed and controversial enough to be doubted. He stood and walked back to the window. Below, a news van idled. Another pulled in behind it. The walls were closing in. Then came the final alert of the night. A major media outlet had just announced an exclusive investigation into Don Lemon's alleged role in an information manipulation network. Don laughed quietly, not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. They weren't trying to stop the story anymore. They were trying to outrun it. And for the first time since this began, Don understood the real danger. The truth wasn't being suppressed. It was being weaponized. And if he didn't act soon, it would destroy everything in its path, including the people who deserved protection. As the city lights flickered outside, Don made a decision. He would not deny. He would not disappear. He would force the story into the open. Even if it meant burning the last bridges he had left. Because once a system built on silence, the decision Don Lemon made that night could not be undone by morning. Once he pressed send, there would be no quiet exits, no negotiated narratives, no controlled damage. The message went out through a secure channel to 3 people he trusted for one reason only: they understood what public risk actually meant. I'm going live, not to defend myself, to show them everything. Within minutes, the response came back from one of them, a veteran broadcast producer who had seen careers end in a single frame. If you do this, the message read, they will come for you harder than before. Don already knew that. What they underestimated was something the industry had forgotten. The audience wasn't passive anymore. By midday, rumors of Don's upcoming appearance had spread across platforms. No official announcement, no network branding, just a countdown that appeared on a single website hosted overseas, impossible to take down quickly. One line of text sat beneath the timer. No edits, no sponsors, no filters. Inside media headquarters across the country, panic shifted from quiet concern to open alarm. Emergency legal reviews were ordered. Executives demanded to know what Don had. Public relations teams drafted preemptive statements in case names were mentioned. Some called him directly. He ignored everyone. At exactly 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the stream went live. Don appeared seated at a simple desk, no logo behind him, no graphics, no music. Just a camera and his voice. The chat exploded instantly. Tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Then more. He didn't smile. Tonight isn't about me, Don began. It's about how information in this country is shaped long before you ever see it. He laid out the timeline slowly, carefully. He explained how stories move through invisible channels. How decisions are framed as editorial judgment while being influenced by external pressure no one admits exists. Then he did something no one expected. He shared his screen. The protocol document appeared in full view. Names redacted, but structures visible. Flowcharts. Internal language no viewer had ever been meant to see. This, Don said, is what stability looks like behind the curtain. Within minutes, other creators began rebroadcasting the stream. Clips spread faster than any takedown request could stop them. Viewers recorded everything. Mirrors multiplied. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A second window opened on the screen. Another person joined the broadcast. A former senior editor from a major network, face visible, name spoken aloud. I can confirm this is real, the editor said. And it goes further than what's been shown. The chat froze. The editor described meetings that never appeared on calendars. Phone calls that replaced emails. Subtle instructions disguised as suggestions. No one ordered censorship. They didn't have to. The system trained people to self-correct. As the editor spoke, Don watched the viewer count climb past 1 million. Then 2 million. Then more. Phones rang in government offices. Lawmakers demanded briefings. Advertisers began pulling campaigns in real time. Inside one corporate boardroom, an executive slammed his fist onto the table. He wasn't supposed to go this far. Back on the stream, the editor paused. There's something else, they said. A release scheduled in less than 48 hours. Not from Don. From people you don't know yet. Don felt the weight of that statement settle in. He hadn't started the fire. He had just revealed the smoke. As the stream ended, Don leaned back, exhausted but steady. He knew retaliation would be immediate. And it was. Within the hour, platforms flagged the video. Fact-check labels appeared, careful with their wording but aggressive in implication. Anonymous sources flooded the media with counterclaims. But something had changed. The public had seen too much. And for the first time in decades, the narrative was no longer moving in one direction. It was splintering. And in the fractures, the truth was beginning to show. Begins to speak, it never stops on its own. The decision Don Lemon made that night could not be undone by morning. Once he pressed send, there would be no quiet exits, no negotiated narratives, no controlled damage. The message went out through a secure channel to 3 people he trusted for one reason only: they understood what public risk actually meant. I'm going live, not to defend myself, to show them everything. Within minutes, the response came back from one of them, a veteran broadcast producer who had seen careers end in a single frame. If you do this, the message read, they will come for you harder than before. Don already knew that. What they underestimated was something the industry had forgotten. The audience wasn't passive anymore. By midday, rumors of Don's upcoming appearance had spread across platforms. No official announcement, no network branding, just a countdown that appeared on a single website hosted overseas, impossible to take down quickly. One line of text sat beneath the timer. No edits, no sponsors, no filters. Inside media headquarters across the country, panic shifted from quiet concern to open alarm. Emergency legal reviews were ordered. Executives demanded to know what Don had. Public relations teams drafted preemptive statements in case names were mentioned. Some called him directly. He ignored everyone. At exactly 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the stream went live. Don appeared seated at a simple desk, no logo behind him, no graphics, no music. Just a camera and his voice. The chat exploded instantly. Tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Then more. He didn't smile. Tonight isn't about me, Don began. It's about how information in this country is shaped long before you ever see it. He laid out the timeline slowly, carefully. He explained how stories move through invisible channels. How decisions are framed as editorial judgment while being influenced by external pressure no one admits exists. Then he did something no one expected. He shared his screen. The protocol document appeared in full view. Names redacted, but structures visible. Flowcharts. Internal language no viewer had ever been meant to see. This, Don said, is what stability looks like behind the curtain. Within minutes, other creators began rebroadcasting the stream. Clips spread faster than any takedown request could stop them. Viewers recorded everything. Mirrors multiplied. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A second window opened on the screen. Another person joined the broadcast. A former senior editor from a major network, face visible, name spoken aloud. I can confirm this is real, the editor said. And it goes further than what's been shown. The chat froze. The editor described meetings that never appeared on calendars. Phone calls that replaced emails. Subtle instructions disguised as suggestions. No one ordered censorship. They didn't have to. The system trained people to self-correct. As the editor spoke, Don watched the viewer count climb past 1 million. Then 2 million. Then more. Phones rang in government offices. Lawmakers demanded briefings. Advertisers began pulling campaigns in real time. Inside one corporate boardroom, an executive slammed his fist onto the table. He wasn't supposed to go this far. Back on the stream, the editor paused. There's something else, they said. A release scheduled in less than 48 hours. Not from Don. From people you don't know yet. Don felt the weight of that statement settle in. He hadn't started the fire. He had just revealed the smoke. As the stream ended, Don leaned back, exhausted but steady. He knew retaliation would be immediate. And it was. Within the hour, platforms flagged the video. Fact-check labels appeared, careful with their wording but aggressive in implication. Anonymous sources flooded the media with counterclaims. But something had changed. The public had seen too much. And for the first time in decades, the narrative was no longer moving in one direction. It was splintering. And in the fractures, the truth was beginning to show. The backlash didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, calculated and precise, each one designed to exhaust rather than overwhelm. By sunrise, Don Lemon's name had been wrapped in new language: reckless, dangerous, irresponsible. Legal analysts filled airtime explaining why unauthorized disclosure was more serious than censorship itself. The message was clear. The process was the punishment. Court filings appeared before breakfast. Cease and desist letters followed by lunch. Anonymous sources whispered that criminal referrals were being considered. None of it was confirmed. None of it had to be. The goal wasn't conviction. It was deterrence. Don sat in his apartment surrounded by quiet screens. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. His phone rang again, this time from the older federal agent. "You just accelerated everything," the agent said without preamble. "That was always going to happen," Don replied. There was a pause on the line. "They've activated containment," the agent said. "And someone tied to the original leak is missing." The word hit harder than any threat. Missing. Not arrested. Not questioned. Gone. The leaker had been careful. Painfully careful. They had never met Don in person. Never used the same device twice. Never stayed in one place too long. And yet, sometime after the broadcast, their secure channel went dark. No goodbye. No warning. Just silence. Across the media landscape, a coordinated counter-narrative solidified. Editorials warned of chaos journalism. Think pieces reframed transparency as destabilization. The same networks that had ignored the protocol document now spent hours dissecting Don's motivations. Not the content, the character. But online, something else was happening. Independent journalists began publishing corroborating evidence. Former staffers shared stories they had never told publicly. Viewers recognized patterns they had once dismissed as coincidence. The audience had learned how to look. That afternoon, Don received a package. No return address. Hand-delivered. Inside was a burner phone and a handwritten note. They didn't disappear. They were taken offline. If you want them back, you need leverage. The phone rang seconds after he powered it on. A distorted voice spoke slowly. "You showed them the framework," the voice said. "But frameworks don't scare power. Deadlines do. What do you want?" Don asked. "Access," the voice replied. "To the release schedule. To the drop you were warned about." Don's jaw tightened. "That release isn't mine." "Correct," the voice said. "But you're the only one they can't shut up right now." Outside, another news alert flashed across every major platform. A congressional inquiry had been announced. Not into the protocol. Into the leak. Don closed his eyes briefly. This was the pivot point. The moment where truth either broke through, or got buried under procedure and noise. "I'll help," Don said finally. "But we do this publicly." The voice chuckled. "Then you'd better be ready," it said. "Because when the next release hits, names won't be redacted." The call ended. As night fell, Don stared at the city again. Somewhere out there, someone had risked everything to expose a system that thrived on invisibility. And now that system was hunting them. The final countdown had begun. 48 hours until the drop. And no one, not the media, not the government, not Don himself, could stop what was coming next. The drop didn't arrive with a warning. There was no countdown this time, no teaser, no dramatic announcement. At 2:11 a.m. Eastern Time, the files simply appeared, simultaneously, across dozens of independent servers, mirrored instantly by thousands of users who understood exactly what they were seeing. Raw data. Unfiltered. Unprotected. Emails with full headers. Audio recordings with uncut timestamps. Internal chat logs stretching back years. Names, titles, dates, instructions. Not allegations. Not interpretations. Receipts. By the time most of the country woke up, the damage was already irreversible. Newsrooms scrambled in chaos. Editors who had spent their careers managing narratives now faced a story that refused to be managed. Legal departments froze entire broadcasts mid-production. Anchors were pulled off air without explanation. Programming schedules collapsed into reruns. And then the names hit. Household names. Media executives. Political operatives. Corporate liaisons. Familiar faces who had lectured the public about transparency while privately negotiating silence. Don Lemon watched it unfold from his apartment, the burner phone buzzing nonstop beside him. The distorted voice called again, no longer calm. "They're trying to narrow it down," the voice said. "Tracing access. Someone's going to take the fall." "Who?" Don asked. A pause. "The leaker," the voice said. "They're alive. For now. But they're being positioned." Don felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settle in his chest. This was the moment no broadcast training prepared you for. The moment where journalism stopped being about stories and started being about people. Another alert flashed. A prominent figure named in the files had just resigned. Then another. Then another. Statements poured out, all eerily similar. Denials that denied nothing. Apologies without admissions. Promises of internal review. But the public had learned how to read between the lines. Hashtags shifted. Not Don's name this time. Not even the protocols. The leaker's alias trended instead. People wanted the source protected. Inside federal offices, tension escalated into open conflict. Some officials pushed for arrests. Others warned that any move against the leaker would confirm everything in the files. The system was eating itself. Don's phone rang again. This time, it was the older agent. "If you know where they are," the agent said quietly, "now would be the time to say something." Don closed his eyes. "If I give them up," he said, "you'll call it procedure. The public will call it proof." The agent didn't argue. Because they both knew it was true. Outside, the city buzzed with a different energy now. Not confusion. Not outrage. Recognition. People were connecting dots they had been trained not to see. The burner phone buzzed one last time. "We're losing control," the distorted voice said. "If you're going to act, it has to be now." Don stood and walked to the desk where his laptop waited, open to a blank document. He knew exactly what he was about to do, and exactly what it would cost. He began to type. Not a leak. A declaration. He would tell the public everything he knew, not just about the protocol, not just about the files, but about how the game was played, how fear kept it running, and how easily it could start again if no one was held accountable. He would remove the shadows. And in doing so, he would protect the one person who had risked everything to light the fuse. As the document saved and auto-backed up across multiple servers, Don felt a strange calm. The final act wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about choosing what kind of system would rise from the collapse. And that choice would be made in public. The statement went live at sunrise. No network logo. No moderation. No sponsors. Just words, clear, direct, and impossible to walk back. Don Lemon did not frame it as an exposé. He framed it as a confession. Not of guilt, but of participation. A career spent inside a system that rewarded silence and punished disruption. A system that didn't need villains to survive, only compliance. He explained how stories were softened before they were killed. How access became currency. How fear disguised itself as professionalism. And how easily the public had been trained to mistake consistency for truth. Then he did something no one expected. He named himself as part of the problem. That single act collapsed the final defense they had prepared against him. Because you cannot discredit someone who has already told you their flaws. Viewership shattered records. Not because it was shocking, but because it was honest. Midway through the broadcast, Don addressed the question everyone was asking without asking. "The source is safe," he said calmly. "And they will remain anonymous. Not because they're weak, but because the truth no longer needs a face." Within hours, the hunt stopped. Quietly. No announcement. No victory lap. Just a gradual withdrawal. Subpoenas redirected. Internal reviews expanded. A narrative shift so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, if people weren't watching so closely now. By the end of the week, the fallout was undeniable. 3 major media executives resigned. 2 congressional committees expanded their scope. A regulatory body long considered symbolic announced enforceable transparency standards. Not reform. Pressure. The system hadn't been destroyed. But it had been forced to change shape. Don Lemon stepped away from public broadcasting that same week. No dramatic farewell. No final monologue. Just a short message posted online. "I didn't leave journalism. I left the illusion." Months later, the media landscape looked different, not cleaner, not purer, but more fragile. And fragility, people learned, can be a form of accountability. As for the leaker, they resurfaced quietly in a different country, under a different name, teaching investigative ethics to a room full of students who had grown up questioning everything. The last time Don spoke publicly, it wasn't on camera. It was at a small event, off the record. Someone asked him if it had been worth it. Don paused, then smiled slightly. "The truth doesn't fix systems," he said. "People do. but only after the truth removes their excuses. And with that, the story ended, not with justice declared, not with villains jailed, but with something far more dangerous to power. An audience that knew how to listen. And a system that knew it was finally being watched.